Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So it's almost 10 after the hour, and for those of you who don't know me, my name is Toka Mustafa. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow for the UT-ITE, and this semester we're collaborating with UT-ITE student chapter, like to join our ventures in our seminars. So, like last years, we used to have our own seminars, but to bring the benefits and share it with everyone, we're collaborating this semester. So we will be hosting one seminar for every month for ICD-CATs related topics. Today, we're glad to have Mellor from Pantonium, Pantonium company, software company, to share with us their project for Belleville that addressed on-demand transit software. So a brief about Mellor. He's the Pantonium's marketing director. He oversees the development and implementation of the company's global marketing and sales. He has presented Pantonium's technology and projects at conferences and events, including the OPTA in 2017, the Toronto Synthetic Intelligence Forum, and Mars Shared Mobility Virtual Hub. He also holds a Bachelor of Arts from the Matrices University. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Luke today.
Thanks for having me here, and I'm more interested in hearing your questions and comments on this project and our technology approach, so I'm going to try to rush through this presentation as fast as possible so we can have lots of time for questions. So we're here to profile, and I'd just like to also welcome Paul and Trish from Belleville. So these are the people in the front lines implementing this technology. So we're happy to have them here, and thanks for coming out. Now, Pantonium is largely, simply an optimization company. So we optimize routes for people transportation, and we're active in multiple markets, primarily medical transport, smart mobility like car sharing, carpooling, ride sharing, and now public transit. And if anybody has any questions about these other markets or other potential applications, we can certainly talk about those. But today we're talking about public transit, and I think everybody here seems like a public transit aficionado, and that's probably why you showed up today. So let's talk about public transit. And now, the problem we are addressing is one of geography and economics, really. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with the concept of urban geometry. So essentially, you can only, the throughput of urban streets and urban transportation systems is constrained. And so you can't run so many cars on a downtown street, for instance. So, personal example, I ride the King Street streetcar every day, and that's a miracle of throughput and efficiency and productivity of a public transit asset. It's moving tens of thousands of people a day. It's great. And so public transit, high order, fixed route public transit works in the central business districts of urban cities. So then why do only 5% of people in North America use public transit to get to work? And why do we have 70% of commuters just driving alone every day? And the numbers are staggering when you think of it. There's 11 million commuters in Canada, so that's 22 million car trips every day just for people driving to and from work. And urban planners will say, well, we just need to densify, and we need to build up, not out. And that might be a good plan going forward in a long-term solution for the challenge of low density. But that's going to take 50 years. And if you hear what the scientists are saying about climate change now, we have about 10-15 years to make significant changes in our habits. So we should eat less steak and drive less, but clearly people aren't doing that. People are still driving to work, and we're moving more and more of our industry and office space into low density areas because that's where the rent is cheap. And so this problem is not going to be solved via urban planning. So public transit, that's where the solution we would hope would lie, but in low-density areas, you know, how do you run a frequent, reliable service with good coverage? Essentially, there's always going to be a trade-off. You can have high-frequency buses, you know, a bus every 5 minutes. It's very convenient. But maybe you can only run that highly convenient service on a few major thoroughfare streets in these areas. So unless we balloon our budgets of public transit significantly, these areas are never going to have good service. So the private sector, in its in its infinite wisdom and charity, has come up with a solution for these low-density areas. And you've probably heard about it in the news. It's called micro-transit. And I know now we're on the new buzzwords, micro-mobility and scooters and whatnot. But a few years ago, micro-transit was the big hot topic. And there was a lot of private sector companies, a lot of private sector money poured into this. And there's countless examples of micro-transit pilots being done across the world. And I'm taking two of the more infamous ones. So Bridge had a model where basically it's a privately owned company, people had an app. You say where you want to go and you say where you want to be, basically where you are and where you want to go. The app would generate a virtual stop and tell everybody in that area to come into the stop. And then a medium-sized van, also owned by Bridge, would come and pick up those people and then drop them off at another stop. And it purported to be optimized and highly efficient, but they ceased operations in 2017. They also have the dubious honor of probably the least efficient, at least in cost-wise, service. They did a pilot in Kansas City, where each trip, after a year of operations, each trip that they did cost about $1,000. So it was a pretty big failure and written about a lot. Chariot is another interesting example. Again, private company, started in San Francisco, and they ran fixed routes using these smaller vehicles, basically in parallel with the public transit service of San Francisco, at least until they got a cease and desist order. They were then purchased by Ford. They scaled up, and they had about 600 employees, and they were recently shut down in January, probably because they just ran out of money. So both of these instances, it was economics that really killed microtransit, just because it's very expensive to provide this service, and you really need a massive subsidy. Public transit operates with a massive subsidy. Uber operates with a massive subsidy. So unless you have a huge pile of cash behind you, it's very difficult to run operations. And these guys, both business-wise, they tried to partner with car companies, and they were essentially crushed by the car companies. At least Bridge, their deal fell through, and Chariot, they were purchased by Ford, and I'm sure that the auditors at Ford looked at their balance sheet and said, this cannot go on. And now let's delve into, so here's a chart, there's lots of numbers here, and I apologize, but I think it's important to give you the context. So the two numbers that we're looking at are riders per service hour, so that's a real indication of the productivity of a service. So the riders per service, I think that's the purest statistic you can generate on the productivity of a service, of a transportation service. And then total cost per rider, pretty self-explanatory. Now the first three in this group are fixed route transits, and these are kind of our control group. So this is what your traditional public transit agency is going to be deploying, and it's the same everywhere. Like, look how closely related these are, even though they're completely geographically different. You have New York City, and I mean, if you can't fill a bus in Manhattan at rush hour, you don't deserve to be in the industry. So, of course, they have very high productivity. Mississauga, on the other hand, is a big sprawling suburb, so their productivity is not going to be as great. Still 27, they're pretty proud of that number. And then small transit systems, so this is like Belleville, Ontario, population 50,000. They have a pretty tight urban core, but 22 people an hour is the average across Canada. And so these are CUDA statistics from 2016, so it's probably not changed that much. And now Innisfil is a whole other model. So Innisfil is using taxis, specifically Ubers, to pick up and drop off people door to door or to certain points in the Innisfil municipal area. So they call this public transit. So now they can, even though they're just taxis, it's public transit, they get gas tax money. And it's, I guess on paper it's a good idea because you don't have to purchase buses. So they don't own those vehicles. You don't have to purchase capital equipment. You don't have to have a big maintenance facility. And Uber subsidizes these trips. So the city of Innisfil pays $5 a trip roughly, a little more, a little less, depending on where people are going. Uber picks up the tab, and then the rider picks up part of the tab as well. Interestingly enough, this model hasn't been replicated anywhere else in Canada, and I suspect that Uber is not going to continue doing this because their goal is to leverage their gigantic pile of money, their VC, like venture capital, 70 billion valuation, and when they IPO, eventually it'll be maybe 140 billion. To use this to make as many rides happen as possible, and then that's their value. We don't know the productivity either. I haven't been able to find any good numbers on it. I suspect it's very bad because you're loading up people doing door-to-door service in sedans. I don't know the peak productivity of that, but I'm sure it's not that great. And now these three are these are good, just micro-transit. And micro-transit, if you guys are familiar with paratransit, I'm sure you all are, micro-transit operates very similar to how paratransit operates. So Wheel-Trans is, Toronto, the TTC's Wheel-Trans is essentially a micro-transit service. Because you have small vehicles, they're doing door-to-door service. The only difference between Wheel-Trans and every other paratransit and then these micro-transit services are that these are available to the general public. And now this is like an economic question that you have to ask yourself as a transit operator. Why would I transport 3 people an hour for $30 a trip when I could do fixed route services, for a tenth of the price and 10 times the efficiency? So I think microtransit, and this is the big criticism everybody has of microtransit, they say it's just like a lousy paratransit service or a decent paratransit service for the general public, and it's a massive money loser. And now we can go in, there's different models, like in Sacramento, the city of Sacramento owns the vehicles, and then they have a vendor providing the software. So a vendor would be like a company like Pantonium would provide the software. In Arlington, the vendor is a company called VIA, and they own the vehicles and they provide the software. And then in Cochrane, Alberta, this is the RFP was just accepted by the city. In this case, it will be a private company called PWT will run the vehicles, and then another private company will run the software, and then Cochrane will pay for it. And now you see at the bottom is Belleville, Ontario. So this pilot, I'll introduce it more later. Notice the difference in numbers here. So, 30 riders per hour, that's better than Mississauga. So this is an on-demand service. So we're not doing fixed routes. It's in Belleville, Ontario, which is, it's a small city, 50,000 people, and we're doing it at nighttime. And it's equivalent to Mississauga. It's better than the average in Canada, and it's getting close to New York City amounts of people movement. So how do we do this? And how do we crush other microtransit pilot operational features? So there's 3 main features of this, and this is Everrun on-demand transit. That's our brand name essentially, and this is our secret sauce triangle. So you start with large buses. So Belleville is using large 40-foot buses. We're not using small vans. We're not using sedans. So you can stuff a lot of people onto there, and you don't have to worry about seats or anything like that. You can easily fit 30 people on a bus at one time. Then it's stop-based, and that's important because doing door-to-door, how many people need to go to Joe's house versus how many people need to go to Walmart? So every stop, if you have a stop-based system, there's going to be people probably waiting at that stop, and there's going to be multiple people getting on and off the stops. There's also other advantages of a stop-based. It's anonymous. Do you really want a bus pulling up to your house and then everybody on the bus seeing where you live? So people, and then if you have a good network of bus stops, why not utilize that infrastructure? You paid for 300 bus stops to cover your city, why not use them? It also helps the routing of the large buses, because people always say, why are you doing large buses on demand? What if they have to go into a cul-de-sac or a bendy street? Well, if you're doing stop-based, using stops, you don't put stops anywhere a bus can't go anyway. So the infrastructure helps with the large buses. And then the continuous global optimization is the software that controls the vehicles. And you have to build this software with the intent of using stops and using large buses. So when we started this project, that's what we designed the software to accomplish. So we aren't just taking a paratransit software system that is designed to handle small vehicles and do door-to-door and then apply it to a public transit. That's a recipe for disaster, and we just ignored what everybody else was doing, and we just designed our own system with these in mind. And that's how we achieve this good productivity. And so in September, we started the pilot, and we released, we took the buses off the fixed routes, we gave everybody access to the app, we got in the news, and I think it was a successful rollout in that everybody in Belleville knew about it. They weren't surprised. And these are the results. So we had a 300% increase in ridership in 80 days. We increased the service area, so the coverage of these buses, by 70%. And we decreased the vehicle mileage, and then we increased the vehicle mileage after the demand spiked. And the comments, people early, the first day, people liked it. And finally, Belleville City Council recently in January made this service permanent. So they said, we like this night bus service. Before it was a temporary pilot program for a year, but they decided just after, on the success of this short pilot, to make it permanent. So it was a success in that mind. And this is what was here before. So this is the route number 11 that covered the city of Belleville before the pilot started from January to September 2018. So this route is an example of compromise in low density, low demand situations, because you have to cover the entire city, really. So this route basically covers the entirety of Belleville's main city. The employment sector is up here, Walmart is here, the downtown is here, the Loyalist College is here, and then you have a residential area around here on their front street. So it was challenged by low ridership. There's not a lot of people use the service. They average maybe 700 to 1,200 people a month total on this service. And there was a bit of deviation in the routes. So if you called in before 4 p.m. and asked to be dropped off or at a stop, they would accommodate that. But there was no technology. It was all manual. So this is what they had before. Now this is the result after several months of operation. So this is a heat map of demand. And the colors are a little weird, but I think we can handle it. So basically the darker areas are areas of high demand and where the buses basically lingered or were located the most in the pilot. So you can see, first of all, the coverage is more centered in the center of the town. It's distributed almost everywhere. So we had basically covered the entire city with service with very limited resources. And to delve deeper into it, you can see that the operation, so these are GPS traces, basically pings of where the vehicle was every minute or so. And you can see this is an hour slice of data for one single vehicle. And you can see this vehicle never went to this side of town for that whole hour because it didn't need to, the demand wasn't there. And then same thing in this case, it didn't go to this part of town because the demand wasn't there. It stayed in the center. It didn't even go to the far edge of town either. And then in this one, it just went to this one single area. So you can see this is where the efficiency comes from, because you're not wasting time driving around in circles with nobody on the bus. It only goes to where it has to go. Initial challenges, a lot of the challenges were operational challenges. Essentially, drivers needed to learn how to use an app, because now they're not just driving around on a fixed route. They have to follow the instructions on the app. They have to press a button they have to board the riders correctly and whatnot. And then the big problem was too much demand. So imagine you're a bus driver, it's midnight, the bus is full, your shift is supposed to be over, and you pull up to Walmart and there's another 12 people there. And you didn't know that they were going to be there. Because only one person ordered it on the app and the other 12 people just knew that they were getting picked up. So things like that really overwhelmed the system early on. So we had to keep adding vehicles, and even now we have to add more vehicles probably. And now, initial questions. So we're working with Ryerson University and U of T to answer some of the initial questions, because we're generating all this data, and it's very interesting data. It's new stuff out there, and there's a lot of good questions that you can ask of this data and basically the impact. So is this taking cars off the road? And that comes back to my initial problem of, we have to get cars off the road. Is this doing so? And you can, it's probably the case between, we have 4,000 people riding it monthly right now. A year ago, there was 1,000 people riding it monthly. So 3,000 people suddenly started riding this monthly. Were they driving before? Were they walking before? Were they just not taking transportation before? And you can get into the human, the sociological impacts of this as well. Is this increasing employment opportunities? And the employers say it does. And then operationally, is this just better than fixed routes? And in what context is it better than fixed routes? So you have to really interrogate the data and compare it. So we need a lot of data scientists to pull apart what we have and then compare it to the operational statistics of Belleville before the pilot. And then finally, for computer science, can we model this? So essentially, what my dream is to take a demand model, to generate a demand model of Belleville, essentially. So you have a bunch of 50,000 actors, and then simulate their transportation demand and give them a fixed route and see how many of them take it, and then give them an on-demand service powered by Pantonium and see how many of them take it, and then replicate and scale it. So that would be an interesting science project for anybody. Probably in the future we'll work on that. So technology aspects, there's 3 technology components of this system. There's a driver guidance, so it's just a tablet installed in every bus. Transportation requests come from an online portal, so it's basically a web app right now, or we'll have fully native mobile apps in 2019. And then they're all communicating with an autonomous central routing system, so that's a cloud-based, basically a server in Barrie is doing all the calculations and administrative functions to control the system autonomously. And I'll get into the specifics of that later. Here's the rider mobile portal. So essentially, you can schedule a trip. You can ask for a trip as soon as possible. You can pick your pickup time or your drop-off time, which I think is very important. And then you can select your stop on the screen, and then you get your schedule, coming soon, and then ETA and vehicle position. So it's pretty simple stuff. Driver app is also very simple. Essentially, the driver just has to press one button at a time between stops, and then when they're at a stop, they can board riders basically just by pressing this button and then hitting all the names on a list of people who they expect to pick up. Or they can, if somebody, let's say somebody is at a bus stop, they didn't make a trip, how do you handle those riders? Maybe they don't have a smartphone or something. The bus driver can set up a trip for them on this application. So you can handle ad hoc riders. Maybe if somebody doesn't want a system to know who they are, they can be completely anonymous and still use public transit, which again is important. So this is how the driver app works. The administrative app is again a web-based system. This is what it looks like, very straightforward. And this is the planning screen, and this is where we get into the autonomous functioning of the system. So essentially, if anybody's familiar with how you plan a paratransit, like let's say a paratransit software system, is you collect your trips into a huge batch, and then you press a button, and then the system calculates the routes and schedules of those vehicles all at once. And then it generates a plan, you look at the plan, you say that's okay, you save the plan, and then it is sent to all your drivers, and then they execute the plan throughout the day. So that's how Wheel-Trans does it, that's how every paratransit organization does it, and it's manual. There's no button in this system, so I mean you can turn it on if you want, but the normal way it operates is it's doing the planning itself. Every time something changes on the road, somebody adds a new trip, somebody cancels a trip, the system will run a global optimization data plan on your new data set. So that's innovative. Not a lot of people do it, especially not a lot of people do it in the context of large buses, stop-based system, and doing it globally. Because there's a big difference between a global optimization and a local optimization, which I'll get to right now. So what we're solving is the vehicle routing problem, and it's one of the toughest problems in computer science and mathematics because it increases in complexity factorially. So every day I get calls from transportation companies, and they have 10 vehicles, and they say, we're looking for routing software, we have 10 vehicles, we do maybe 100 trips a day, and it takes our dispatcher maybe 2 to 4 hours a day to build a plan. Because really what they're doing is they're looking for a solution out of millions of potential solutions. And human beings can do that. Like human beings have heuristics. You can hack together a system to figure out an optimal plan for transportation to solve this vehicle routing problem. But as soon as you add a certain amount of vehicles, just the numbers become absurd. So when you go from 10 to 30, you have this number of possible solutions. So suddenly your heuristics don't work very well. And it's going to take you, more time than there is in the, human race's existence to figure out a plan for this isn't a big difference in numbers. Like, what happens if you have 100 trips and suddenly you have, quintillions of possible solutions? So in order to solve this, you need to use an algorithm. So Pantonium in particular uses, and we could talk, I'm not the best person to talk to about this. I'm not a computer scientist. I didn't design the algorithm. But essentially we use a polynomial algorithm using meta-heuristics, and we're doing a local or a hill climbing search. It's a hill climbing search algorithm. So essentially, imagine you're blind and you have to find the tallest mountain in the Rockies. You jump around randomly, and then you know the height of your location. You jump around randomly many iterations to find higher and higher points. And every time you get into a valley or a plateau, you kick your search somewhere else to find, and then start your search again. So that's essentially a hill climbing algorithm does. So we've managed to make a highly efficient one, so we can get the planning time down to a few seconds. So when you're trying to find a potential solution out of finding literally a needle in all the haystacks in the world, and you can do that in a few seconds, that's how you can that's how you can provide on-demand transit as a service. So things like Uber provides a lot of trips per hour, right? They have thousands of, there's 70,000 Ubers in New York City every day providing, thousands and thousands of trips. But they're not doing that with optimization, they're just matching it. So there's a big difference between doing a global optimization on a transportation problem and then just saying, let's just find the closest, the closest person or the closest car to this person, they're getting it. We're not going to think about this we're not going to try to increase the efficiency. Now, why would you want to increase the efficiency? And I'll get to that in a second. Why would you want to increase the efficiency? So let's think about this at scale. Let's think about all the cities in Canada between 50 and 150,000 people. So this is their total operating cost of all their public transit. So these public transit services have about 1,000 buses on the road every day collectively. They cost $372 million. They're doing 75 million trips, which, when you compare it to what the TTC does, it's not very impressive, but still, that's a lot of trips. And they have about 3 million revenue service hours. But again, they're averaging 22 people an hour. So what if you just gave Pantonium all of these buses and let them run it for a day? Or let them run it for a year. We would do 24 million extra trips, and that's a value of $120 million annually. So that's the core feature of optimization, is you can keep your operating budget the same. You don't have to add any more buses. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to double the budget. You just keep the same operating hours, but you just apply optimization to it, and suddenly you get a lot more value out of your fleet. Now, of course, it performs way worse than subways and streetcars and light rail. Obviously those high-order subways and streetcars, you can't get rid of them. But again, in those low-density areas, it's better than almost any small town nighttime services. I'm sure we have a higher productivity going on in Belleville than the TTC's Blue Bus night network. The TTC is very proud of that network, but I doubt it's very efficient compared to what we're doing. And now, how would you, let's take an example in the real world of what a business case that I would pitch to somebody is, the province of Ontario right now is very interested in grabbing hold of municipal public transit assets. So I'm sure you've all heard about the subway upload and stuff. Why don't they upload 10% of all municipal transit fleets and say, hey, we're going to take 10% of your buses off your hands, we'll pay for them, but we're going to run them on demand, we're going to control them with a centralized software system, and we're going to call it like a way to get people to work, especially those people working at nights, people working in factories on the edge of town, they need this service, let's do that for them. And what would that look like technologically? What you need, so this is a Raspberry Pi. So what we would do is take 1,000 Raspberry Pis, network them together in some kind of super cluster, and then run them for 24/7, and let them control 1,000 buses. And we could do that this year, and it wouldn't cost. It would cost basically a rounding error of what you would save annually, or what the value that you would generate. The cost of that software and hardware combination is negligible. So that's what we're not looking to do this, but that's just a hypothetical to get you guys thinking about the potential of this type of service. And then finally, this is a debate that's going on internally in Pantonium. So is this artificial intelligence? And really, people, we look at a list of our competitors and people in the technology space, and everybody calls themselves AI. And they do this because if you're trying to raise a round in the valley, it's better to be an AI company than an route optimization company, because it's not the buzzword of the moment. So, and you can look up what we do on Wikipedia and you can see, oh, they're a local search algorithm, that's an AI. But our technology team would say, we're not AI, stop calling us things that we're not, let's be accurate. And then the marketing and sales guys are like, well, you can call it AI. I can make an argument for it. So that's a big question we still don't know the answer to. And that's the end of the presentation, and I hope we still have time for questions. Yeah, take anything you guys want to know.
Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate the AI meme.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you guys have any plans to implement something like this in a larger scale anytime soon. I think it's really cool that you're doing it in Belleville, but I'm optimistically a little skeptical about how this would work at a larger scale.
Yeah, there's a lot of, so Belleville is a nice scale because we can cover the entire city with the service, and it's convenient. And I think what the failure of a lot of these pilots were, they pick a very small service area, and we saw that, we responded to an RFP from Calgary because they heard about this news. They wrote an RFP, and they picked a service area basically on the outside of their outskirts. They haven't even built the neighborhood yet, so nobody lives there. It's in the middle of nowhere, and they just want to provide a service just to that one location. And I can guarantee you, nobody's going to use that service because it's not helpful. But to scale it out to a city the size of, let's say, Mississauga, you would need to have many zones, and then you would need to coordinate between those zones, because you can't just have somebody on a bus for an hour and a half driving across Mississauga. Yeah. So we're thinking about how to scale it in a larger situation. That's why I like the idea of hitting every single town of the Belleville size and scaling. It's kind of like scaling outwards, not upwards. It's also easier to optimize because if you have 100 vehicles in one depot, it's very challenging to optimize that because you need basically 100 cores to work on that one problem all the time. So yeah, we're working on it. We want to scale it, just don't know how yet.
Okay. And I guess as a quick follow-up, what sort of indicators are you using in Belleville to decide if it's working and how to essentially market it to other cities?
Right now, pretty much all the stats that I have in this presentation are what we're using.
Okay.
So public transit agencies are very impressed by the productivity of it. So the 30 riders per hour is a very significant number. So they like that. They like the ridership increase. If you increase, right now, public transit agencies are declining or increasing or stabilizing their ridership at about 1%. So, the TTC has gone down maybe 1%. It's pretty much stagnant growth. So if you grow by 300%, that's a pretty significant number. So they like that number. And, yes?
Thank you for the presentation. I think I made one thing maybe from the presentation about the on-demand service. Do you need real time or just the demand comes a day before?
It's real time.
It's real time.
So that's why you need the continuous optimization because, and this is maybe a point so Belleville is operating from 9 to 12 at night. So what happens if somebody requests a trip at 10 p.m. And there's nobody in Belleville's office to take that call. So in the traditional sense, if you're doing a dial-a-bus kind of solution, you have to call the day before because they have to have time to build a plan. They have to have time to dispatch it out. So we don't do that. We're doing it in real time. So essentially, somebody requests a trip, it comes into the system, and then the system allocates it to a vehicle immediately.
So how long should they wait until the bus arrives?
I think right now it's a half-hour wait or a 15-minute wait. It's adjustable. Essentially, that's an operational decision. So we could do, 5-minute pickup windows, essentially, or 1-minute pickup windows if we had enough vehicles on the road.
And so we have a pickup time window and drop-off time window because people want to get into the work.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you also consider it drop-off time window?
Yeah, and that's if somebody requests, I need to be at Walmart at 10 p.m., that's the time that the system is going to plan to get the bus there. Well, it depends, and it will readjust and jiggle things around in its planning. So maybe one bus was, maybe during the day when it was building a plan based on people calling in, people requesting trips or previously requested trips, it'll have one person on one bus, but then at 10 o'clock when just before that person needs to be there, it realizes that another bus is a better option, it will switch it around and tell that bus to pick up that person.
And another thing that maybe one person give a request, but maybe 10 persons show up on that location. So how do you deal with that?
Right now, it's just the bus driver can ad hoc put those people's trip requests in. So yeah, that's a check.
To wait until the next bus arrives.
That could happen. Like imagine if the bus is full, or essentially Belleville, they added a cleanup bus to handle that problem. So essentially, they had 2 vehicles originally, and then they added a 3rd vehicle to kind of operate in the last hour just to pick up all those people who came last minute and weren't able to be accommodated. So again, that's like an operational issue. Do you have enough vehicles to cover the demand? And that's what we learned is we needed way more vehicles to cover the demand just because it ballooned so quickly.
And I think it's night trips like a kind of phase because people have a trip during the night. It's kind of the pattern through the year might be phased because they're going to night shift, do their home or home to night shift. Yeah. Did you try to exploit this opportunity?
The problem is, like, imagine the route is fixed, but it just so happens that you need to be at work at 10 o'clock and the bus only gets, and there's a half-hour difference and you basically have to wait half an hour. It could be inconvenient for you if it's fixed. And imagine if it is fixed and you have to wait, let's say an hour, it's an hour-long inconvenience for you for whatever reason, just the way the headways and the timing lines up. Then, like, are you going to take a bus and wait? Like, let's say you're just going to work like a minimum wage job for 4 hours, but you have to wait an hour just because of the inconvenience of public transit. And it happens to everybody, and it's fixed. It's always going to be that way. And like, are you going to take public transit? No, you're going to buy a car, or you're going to get your mom to drive you or something. So that's why on-demand is actually a better option because you can just say, I need to be there at 10, and it's going to get you there at 10 to the best of its ability. And that's why people drive. It's way more convenient. In these large areas, it's much more convenient to drive. That's why the numbers are so dismal.
But this decreases the uncertainty in your system. I'm not saying that had we fixed point of pickup, but the person can have a fixed origin destination and pick up and drop off.
Oh yeah, they can. What we have in the app is you can have a recurring trip. So you can schedule. Let's say you have to be at work at 10 every day. You can just build a recurring trip, and we would appreciate that because it helps us plan better. Yeah, you can schedule trips like ongoing, and I think a lot of people do that. Any other questions? Yes.
So do you have any means of verifying if you say this person wants to be at 10 p.m. somewhere?
Yeah.
Do you verify that if it's really the case at the end?
Yeah. So there's 2 ways. We developed basically a QR code. So you schedule it on your phone. And then once it's been scheduled and approved, you get a QR code on your phone, and then you can go and get it scanned on the bus by the bus driver. Belleville's not using that solution. Because the app also allows, basically, it has your name or email, or it could provide you an anonymous code, and then you can go to the bus driver and say, I'm so and so, or I have this email, or I have this anonymous code. The bus driver just taps your name, and that's confirming that you're on the bus. And then same thing for getting off the bus. You can say, like, I have this code, I'm getting off the bus now, and the driver can tap it.
Okay, but what I meant is that do you verify that if you're telling this person it's going to take you 20 minutes to go to that place, at the end did it really happen? Like, do you verify, well, do you have a way of knowing if it was actually the case?
Yeah, so we have basic reports. So I think right now our on-time percentage is 94%, based on the data that we generated. I don't think the data is as clean as it should be just because the driver's been learning how to use the app and whatnot. But we do have real time in the web app. There is real time. You can click on a bus and see its schedule unfolding, and it's color coded. So if you see a bunch of red, you know there's a bunch of lates and whatnot. But it's an autonomous. Like, we don't really care about that because we assume that nobody's looking at it. It's just running.
Okay. Yeah, I had another question. Are you planning to do a survey to know what those person would have been doing if they?
So we're and actually UT is doing it.
Okay.
So that's the funding is still, we don't know about it yet, but we will be planning to do a survey of the riders to ask exactly that, like what are you doing with these trips and whatnot. Very interested in that. Any oh yes, in the back.
Very, very interesting. Do you have any perception of what these new riders, where they're coming from?
Paul, do you have any perception of where the riders are coming from?
Everywhere. Before the service that we had with the fixed route and the slight deviation, we were only picking up people that had no other option really to get to work and back because it wasn't convenient. It was very difficult to use. As soon as we launched the app and everybody had the ability to book a bus from anywhere in the city, they literally come out of everywhere. Not just workers. We were picking up people just to go out for an evening. A lot of students from Loyalist College to get out and back, and a lot of high school students with part-time jobs. It just opened up the availability of transit for everyone, and it was a lot more convenient.
And also, how do you, I mean, with only 2 buses and 30 passengers an hour, how do you limit how long a person can be on the vehicle?
So the algorithm has a lot of parameters that you just, basically you go into the administrative system and you say, I only want people to be on a bus for 90 minutes. And you set that as you can choose that as a setting. And I only want to have tight time windows or wide time windows. So if you're really constrained with the number of vehicles versus the number of the high demands, then you can loosen up the parameters that the algorithm considers. Or if you have very high expectations of service, like if you want everybody to run or if you want it to run as quickly as Uber, for example, then you just tighten up the parameters on the algorithm. But then you'll have to add a lot of vehicles to manage that.
Yeah, but a 90-minute.
Well, I just threw that number out there. I'm not sure exactly what the Belleville has it set as. But I think there was a question. Did you have a question?
It's actually very similar. Just wonder whether, like, the perception of the social demographics of the riders. So I think based on your explanation would be a lot of like students and people doing like nighttime parking jobs.
Yeah, well that's another thing we're hoping, because we have everybody's email, like we could just easily send out a survey to figure out the demographics. Or we could use the, there's ways to find that out. We haven't done that yet, but we're definitely interested in that. I think there's a question over, oh yes.
Yeah, just a very interesting presentation. I have a question about, did you just mention that you will serve the passengers who had their order first? I mean, you say you will give them answer whether they will be served after 15 or half an hour, right? But maybe there are 10 people that they have their orders at 10 o'clock, and you give them the answer at 10:30. And maybe there are more people that have their more requests on 11, and you have to optimize your service plan, right?
Yeah.
Just have a question. Do you think maybe the final result is not the optimal plan if you just serve the passengers that come first, not in a general.
Yeah, okay. So that's an interesting, so the algorithm, I know we were talking about this, the algorithm does not consider fairness right now. Okay. So it's considering, we built it just for grim efficiency. So it's not, I think, I can't really speak to the very specifics of it, but essentially we're always trying to get the optimal. We're always trying to find the global optimal, and it'll keep doing. So every night it's running like hundreds of iterations of planning, and then in each iteration of planning, it's doing thousands of individual calculations to find the global optimal. So even if there are, is your question if we don't know the actual demand, is it an actual optimal plan? Is that the question? Because there are unknowns. Like if there's 10 people and we don't know where they're going, in reality, it's not an optimal plan. And that's the constraint of all of these systems is they're only as good as what they can see, essentially. If the system does not have information on demand, it's not going to be an actual optimal plan in reality.
Yeah, so will you refuse some passenger demand? I mean...
Yeah, that happens. And like the person who, Paul told me this, the person who said, I like it, it's good, on the first day, she couldn't get trips a few months later because it had such high demand. And again, that's not necessarily a technology problem, it's an operational problem. We have too much demand for transit, and that's...
Oh, so you will refuse the passenger because of the train capacity, right?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
Or not even the bus capacity, it's the system capacity there's just not enough, if there's so many people already on the bus and they all need to be dropped off, and then by the end of that, the shift is over. The driver has to go home. Like, we can't pay him overtime, so we can't take any more trips on. Yes.
Yeah. What about no-shows? Have you had many? Do people get notifications? Is there any consequence?
Yeah. So right now there's no payment tied to it. So theoretically, like, don't get any ideas about this, but you could just bombard the system with requests and there would be no penalties. So, but don't do that. And it would be very easy to prevent no-shows if we had payment involved, or we could just automatically cancel your account if you're using the system and whatnot. Right now it's very ad hoc. And I don't know, Paul, have you guys noticed a lot of no-shows? We haven't heard it, or support guys haven't heard anything about that.
Not a lot of no-shows, but we do have a lot of people that do a lot of repeat bookings.
Yeah.
We keep an eye for those, and basically we just delete all of them except one. They get there when kind of pick the one that we want them to have.
How long does the bus wait at a stop if the person's not there?
Not very long enough for the bus to pull up, identify that it's arrived, have a quick look around to see if anybody's coming or on their way, then they just depart for the next stop.
So it's not like specialized transit?
No, not at all.
And I didn't understand what no payment would that mean?
So right now the app does not handle payment. It's
okay,
so you just you pay fare media. That could be easily integrated. That's an accessibility issue and also just a cost and timing issue.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you have any plan to implement this during the daytime in the near future? Or?
Not in Belleville. We're talking to a lot of different municipalities, and we think it could obviously work in daytime, especially in very low demand areas. Theoretically, you could run an entire town on this if it has low enough productivity, 24/7. Just haven't done it yet. Okay. But we have a lot of customers working in other spaces that do run in daytime.
Because like daytime, you would have to deal with congestion as well, I guess. Or?
Yeah. So the way we handle congestion and traffic is essentially every road. So we use a map data provider to build the routes. So you basically need map data to know how long it takes and the distance between each stop. And it's a concept called route matrices that you get in map data. And each road has an average speed for a time period. And so it's like a yearly average speed, which for planning is basically the best solution we have. I mean, you can have real-time live traffic data, but it's not very useful for planning because it could be, you could have a backup now, but in an hour it could be gone, and you're planning for a trip in 2 hours. So using live data is actually risky to do, so the yearly average is much better. But yeah, obviously this would be very challenging to use in a very dense urban. Like, I wouldn't put this in downtown Toronto during the day. Like, that'd be crazy. Again, that's why it's best suited for small towns and rural areas and things of that nature. Yes.
Is the fare price the same as the company?
Yeah, it's fair price is the same.
But the running cost for each rider is cheaper right now, right?
It's the same.
Not for you, for the company.
For Belleville, so yeah, like Belleville, it costs Belleville X amount of dollars to run their bus, regardless of if they're doing it on demand or doing it on fixed routes.
But when you're serving more people, your revenue increases.
Yeah, exactly. So they're generating more revenue. They had to add a couple more vehicles to handle the increase in demand, but the cost per trip is pretty much the same for a non-demand trip in this model, at least. And that's a big advantage of because public transit is very efficient at running vehicles because they have economics of scale. They have an expectation of having lots of money going forward, so they can run buses very cheaply. You know, it'd be cheaper for a public transit to run a bus, regardless of if it's on demand or fixed route, than it is for a private company. Like that's why Chariot burned out, because it's very expensive for a private company to run vehicles as cheaply as public transit. So I think the public sector is the best option for this type of service.
So, being private or public, it's not making any difference. Like, because it's like carpooling, but instead of the car with 5 seats, you have bus with 30 seats.
Yeah, the driver costs the same, unless like you use contract drivers who have their own vehicles and whatnot, like the Uber model. The driver cost is generally the most expensive part of running this. And then you just think of productivity per fare. And also a private company has different requirements than a public company. A private company, if let's say they've raised money, they have to show their shareholders that they have growth. They have to show the shareholders that they can access a large market. And they have to make every trip profitable. Public transit, they operate at a loss, whatever. That's just the name of the game. And they have an expectation of continuous funding for eternity, essentially. Until like civilization collapses, they're going to be getting budget. But compared to a private company, you can't really build a reliable network from a private company. Like even Uber, if their IPO falls through, we might not be riding Uber in a couple of years. So it's not a stable system. Okay. Any other questions?
One more question. So you mentioned that at the beginning you had people, when you came to the stop, there would be like extra people there who realized that, you have not just like a random place on the street, you're actually having people go to bus stops.
Yeah.
Has that behavior changed over time? Have you seen people be more like the one-to-one users are actually the ones, that they do kind of make the request?
Paul, do you see that happen a lot? Like, I think you mentioned something like...
It's still happening, but less frequently. When we first launched, one person would book the ride and then say to 15 of their friends, it's already got the bus booked, and they'll get on. It's getting less frequent, but it still occurs.
So how does that impact the dwell time? I saw you had your bus driver doing a fair bit of stuff.
Yeah.
Rather than just people just happy on getting on, they're having to like check their names off or put in a trip. Has that?
Yeah. Has it impacted dwell time or not?
To some extent, but boarding through the tablet is very fast. Because you've already got your pickup location, all you have to enter into your drop-off location. And it's a matter of 3 button taps and the next person's on. So it may add, depending on the size of the crowd, 3 to 5 minutes, but not enough to really impact. If it was happening at every single stop, it'd be a problem. But it's infrequent, so it's not a huge problem. It's just the extra volume that we're not anticipating we get because it's an issue.
1 o'clock. I'm going to focus
it's
on.
1 o'clock.
Okay. Well, thanks for all your questions, everybody. Thanks for showing up. And I'll have the deck available to Toke. So if you are interested, you can definitely access it for further research. Yeah, thank you.